Welcome to Programming and Deployment using AWS CloudFormation. In the first part of this lab, we're going to look at developing a CloudFormation template. Now, this is essentially a JSON file, and we're going to use a JSON editor to create that CloudFormation template. We're going to do this so that we can visually see what is going on with the CloudFormation JSON file, and also that we can create good quality JSON without any errors. Then we're going to actually grab that CloudFormation template, and we're going to hand it over to our CloudFormation service, which will create a CloudFormation stack which will contain resources that are defined in that template. In the second part of this lab, we're going to look at a much quicker way of creating complex CloudFormation templates without having to use a JSON editor. And what we're going to use is CloudFormer. And a CloudFormer is essentially an EC2 instance with some software running on it that will look at our account and the resources within that account, and we can select from those resources, and we can use those resources that we've selected to define a CloudFormation template, and it will automatically create that JSON file for us. So this is very important when we've got very complex architectures that are taking quite some time to develop, and we want to be able to keep track of those and any changes to that. So very good when combined with version control of those JSON documents as well, so you can actually see changes and the effects on those changes, and roll back to previous versions if you have issues. Then we're going to look at using that CloudFormation template that was developed from CloudFormer, and we're going to use that again to create those resources that we've defined using CloudFormer. So we're just going to jump into our JSON editor at JSONeditoronline.org, and we'll just pass in some curly brackets here on the side here, and then just pass it across to have an empty object. So the first thing we're going to put inside our object will be a string, and that's going to be the version of our template. So that's not essential, but it is recommended, because you should really define what version of the CloudFormation template that you're actually writing for. So in the future, if there are changes, your CloudFormation template will still work. The next thing we're going to add in will be a description. So we'll just append, and we put in a string again of description. And the next one we're going to put in will be, well, we'll just spell description properly first. The next one we're going to put in there will be an object, and that's going to be a parameters object. So the parameters are what we are going to get from the user at launch time. So they're going to be parameters that we're going to set up our resources with. So it can be, for example, if it's a DynamoDB instance that we're launching, then we'll be looking at read and write capacity of that DynamoDB instance. So we'll just put that in there now. And the next thing we would like to add will be another object. So I just made a mistake there, so I'll just get rid of that. So if you make a mistake, just go back and you can remove. And so I've actually appended it to the object and not the actual, I've appended it to parameters instead of the main object. So I just append that there now and put in an object. The next one is going to be resources. Now the resources section is the only section of the template that is essential. So we can do without parameters, description, template, format, version, outputs, etc. But the resources, we have to have a resources section. The reason being, if there's no resources, we're not going to be creating anything. So obviously you need to have a resources section. So we'll just pop that in now. And the next thing we're going to add in there will be outputs. So we're just going to append another object in there, and we're going to call that outputs. Okay, so we'll just pass that across and we'll have a look at that. So there we go. We're a template version, we've got a description, the parameters object, resources object, and the outputs object. So in the output section, so when we're launching our stack, these outputs will be outputted to the users to give them information on what's going on. So we have parameters which will be taking inputs from the user and outputs which will be outputting information to the user. Okay, so I've just finished populating all of this, so thanks to the magic of pre-recorded video, that's all been done. I decided not to go through and bore you to death on how to use the JSON editor. The notes there are very, very specific on how to do all that, so just go through and if you get stuck, you can always cut and paste from the gist file at the end there. So let's have a look at this. So we've got our parameters section. So again, this is going to be what we pass to set up our instance when it's created. So our stack. So what we're going to have here is that we want to know the read capacity units. So when the user launches his stack, he or she will be asked for the read capacity and write capacity units, and these are the same. Just put the values in here are the same by the looks of things, but on launch you'll be able to put in different values for each one. So what have we got here? So we've got a description, obviously, and then the type, what we're asking for is a number. Well, that's quite obvious. So default. So what's going to happen is that when the screen first comes up for read capacity units, it will have already put in there the number of 1. And so the minimum number we can put in there is obviously 1. And then we've got a maximum number that we can put in there, which is which we've got there 10,000. And the constraint, we've got a description for it and just saying it must be between 1 and 1,000. So that's how we do parameters, and we're going to get our read capacity units. So we can actually refer to those further on in our resources section. So let's have a look at that. So in our resources, again, the essential component of a CloudFormation JSON file that you must have. So we've got the name of the table. So the resource is called table of products, and so that's another object inside of this object. And then we've got a text which is type, and the type is a DynamoDB table. So that's quite self-explanatory. Table of products, which is a DynamoDB table. And then we've got the properties of this table. So we've got attribute definitions. So we create attribute definitions which we can then refer to in other areas of our CloudFormation template. So let's have a look at that. So we've got 3 attribute definitions. So the first one is going to be the ID, which is a number, and we're going to obviously refer that that's going to be our primary key for this database, and so we will be referring to ID later on. And then we've got product category, which is a string, and that again is going to be referred to because it's part of it will be the hash for the global secondary index. And then we've got the price, which will be referred to later on, which as our range for the global secondary index. So I'll just close that there now. And we're going to schema. So we've got an object which is actually an array, so we can have multiple objects inside of this here. And attribute definitions also is an array, so you have multiple objects, so you can have many of those attribute definitions inside this array. So key schema, and here we have our primary key, which is ID and hash. So we've referred to this attribute ID, which is in here. So we've got the attribute name ID in our attribute definitions, and that's how we refer to that there. And what it is, it's a key type hash. And here is where we can refer to our read capacity units. So we look at there and we're referencing read capacity units, which was in our parameters section. So we look in here, read capacity units, which is what we're going to get at launch time from our user. And the same for our write capacity units. So we're referencing the write capacity units that we get from our parameters section. Then we've got our global secondary indexes, and now this is an array also, so we can have multiples in here if it would accept that. And so then we've got our global secondary index, which is going to have an index name, and it will also have a key schema, and which will have 2 objects in it, So the first one being our hash, which is product category, which we have referred to again in our attribute definitions here, product category. And we've also got another attribute, price, which we are referring to as our range key there. And then projection, we're going to be just projecting all. We're not going to be limiting the projection of anything there. And our provision throughput, again, we're referring to our read capacity units in our parameters section. So what we're going to get from the user at launch of this stack. So there we have it. So the properties, we're going to have attribute definitions, the key schema, so primary key, the provision throughput, and the global second indexes, which will have its own set of schema and provision throughput as well. And then the outputs, so just like we have parameters that are going to be getting inputs, we have outputs that will be outputting information to that user as well. So if we're going to be outputting table name, which will be the value, or to have a description, and the value for table name that we're outputting will be table of products, which is referencing table of products. And so we go into resources, table of products there. So we'll just jump now into CloudFormation and we'll run our template. So we are now in the CloudFormation console. So we can see we've got a number of options here to create a stack or create a template from our existing resources. So we can actually launch CloudFormer or we can create a new stack. So later on we will look at using CloudFormer to create a snapshot of all of our resources and put that into a template that we can use later on. So we're just going to go into create a new stack and we'll give this stack a name. And then we're going to get our template. So select a samplet template. So we need to upload a template to Amazon S3, and we choose our file that we saved, our JSON file that we saved. Okay, so now we can click on next. Okay, so now we're in the parameters section. So again, in our template we had a parameters section, so we're being asked now to specify the parameters for read capacity units and write capacity units. In here we've got our default of 1 and we can change that if we want. We'll leave that as 1. We don't want to spend too much money on a lab here. And we click next. Okay, so we can add some additional tags in there. We won't bother with that. We can add some notifications there. So we won't do any notifications there either. So just click on next. So we've got a review here. So basically we've given it a name. I've given mine called backspace-lab. We've got a URL for that template that we've just uploaded. We've got a description. So that description came from our template. And then we've got our read capacity units and write capacity units. And again, that came from the default in our template. And we've got no other options there, so that's fine. And rollback on failure is selected as yes, so that's quite important. So if something does fail, then we don't end up with a whole heap of resources that we need to go through and delete afterwards. Okay, so we just click on create now. Okay, and we can see it's in progress, and it will eventually change from create in progress to complete. So we just click on refreshing there. So what we can see is we can see the events that are going on here. So the user has initiated the CloudFormation stack. We're currently creating the DynamoDB table, and that will have a physical ID here we've got for that DynamoDB table, and it's going to be creating the resources there for it. So just fast forwarding there, the stack has been completed. It's create complete. So you can see here create, we've created a table of products and everything's finished there. So we should be now able to go into DynamoDB and have a look at that. So we'll just do that now. Go to services and DynamoDB. Let's have a look. and we'll be looking for a DynamoDB instance called \lab table of products and some other guff on the end of it. Okay, so there it is there, \lab table of products, and it has the hash key of ID that we specified there, no range, and the sum of read throughput and sum of write throughput, which will be the sum of the indexes and the key. So we can look in here, we've got here provisioned read capacity 1, which came from our template, and the provisioned write capacity, which came from our template also. Our table name, table of products here, and we've got ID number as the primary hash key, and we've also got here a ARN. Let's go into indexes. Okay, so we can see here. Alright, so what have we got here? We've got no local secondary indexes. It doesn't have any. We didn't define any. But it's got a global secondary index, so there's the name of it that came from that template. We've got a product category for the hash, again from the template, and a range, again from the template. We've projected all attributes that came from the template as well. The read capacity and write capacity units also came from the template. So we've successfully created everything that was in that, all of the resources that were in that template, and set it up with the appropriate parameters that we were looking for. So in the next part of this lab, we'll look at using CloudFormation to take snapshots of what we've created.